Okay, we are live, and this is week 2, or I've had a crazy week. This is the second time this week that we're doing a live Workplace Wanderer. It's a special time. Just wanted to kind of honor my guests' needs and make sure that we can fit this in. And it's a topic I'm really interested in, mostly because I'm learning a lot about it now and will be over the next few years, I imagine. The topic today is inclusive leadership and inclusive workplaces. And I have Greg Mazzeo.
Very close.
Mazzeo. You just told me too, and I messed it up. I've been reading for like 4 hours straight, so just bear with me. So thank you, Greg. I appreciate you joining me today.
Sure, absolutely. Glad to be here.
Okay, so backstory. There is, so Greg is in the 3rd year of the doctoral program that I'm currently in for leadership psychology. So somebody I reached out to, I think as I was about to start, and just kind of friended you on LinkedIn. And we've just connected a few times back and forth, but somebody that has already provided some sage wisdom as somebody who's been through a couple years of what I'm going through now and just starting. So first of all, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sure. It's a shared journey. So that's what it is.
I'm really feeling that. And, you know, we're going to talk about inclusivity, but I'm really feeling the way that William James honors the individual differences of everyone, but also finds ways to connect each one of us. And you don't feel alone on this journey. And one of the first things they did during the orientation was to make sure that everyone within our cohort found some level of connection and that we were all bonded in some way. And it was like an instant, almost like an instant common bond that we all had, that we're going to go through this together. And there was an understanding almost within 2 days. We all had this really general understanding that we're in this together. And regardless of backgrounds, races, colors, religions, none of that mattered anymore. And we sort of found that common thread. And William James did a really good job of igniting that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to share that part of kind of that entrance way to a chapter of your life, if you will. And that's really starting a new job, starting a new position, starting a new academic journey, all that, and that the importance behind really creating that inclusiveness and how that leverages your ability to be successful, or how that gives you the opportunity to be successful in the most successful way. You could be successful, but what does that even look like? And how do you leverage inclusiveness to get there, to reach your outcomes, to be a part of something maybe greater than yourself? So I think that's a really good way to look at it. William James my experience has, and I think it's important to speak when we talk about inclusive leadership and inclusiveness. I think it's important to speak about your kind of for yourself and your experience, because one of the key indicators I've learned along the way in this journey is that inclusive leadership and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, those concepts, everyone's on their own journey with it. So it's a very individualized journey for that person based off of their identities, their experiences, on all things in between. So when you enter a group, like a cohort, or enter a team, it's really important to find those moments of creating inclusiveness, which sounds like part of what you experienced in orientation as you enter the realm of becoming doctor.
Yes, it feels so far away right now.
It goes quick.
I'm 2 weeks closer. So, yeah, you know, I think what surprised me, and I think I'm excited to dive into this, what surprised me is I think there's a lot of misnomers and misinformation, or a lot of prejudice almost against this idea of DE&I. And there's a lot of very strong feelings about the integration into workplaces. Not saying that there's a lot of strong feelings about other races or anything like that, but saying that there's this idea of forced inclusion or forced diversity. People seem to have very strong responses to. And what I found interesting, which I want to get into, but what I found interesting was how much of it was really understanding ourselves and how we present to the world and how we perceive the world around us. And once you gain a better understanding of that, you can understand what lenses or what blinders that you have on to see, first of all, your own experiences, but also understanding the experiences of others around you.
Yep. And so that's really, really a good point, when especially in a position of leadership, to recognize how you're showing up, and maybe the peers that you're alongside, and really getting to know how they're showing up and how their experiences have kind of followed them to where they are. The first thing I think of when I'm sitting here talking about inclusive leadership with you is we're presenting as cisgendered white males, and we're talking about this topic. So that's a really, really, that's an arena that is common, but can also, we need to put that explicitly into the environment we share dialogue on. That our experiences, there's probably similarities, but when we start adding those different layers of diversity, and to kind of reach inclusion, because you can have a diverse group, but they might not be inclusion within it. So really being able to name those things and to be able to work into those differences is really, really a key factor in being able to create the steps towards inclusion. So you can have the different elements, but it's the beauty of connecting them, and how you do that is so important. And to recognize how people are showing up and who they are and what they bring with them is really a crucial role in creating that space of inclusion. I saw the photo of your cohort. It's a very diverse group of folks, and that's not uncommon at William James. It's not uncommon in workspaces these days. So they're continuously becoming more diverse. We're continuously, with globalization, becoming multicultural, diverse, and in different ways that we might not even see on the outside. So neurodiverse, different abilities, different thought processes, the ways we think, our past experiences. So diversity runs really deep. And so I think when we think about it in a way that is, yes, different visually presenting ways, we have to look at it also in a deeper way. And so it's not going away. So when there's that resistance factor that people might, or companies might express or share or formulate policies or procedures about, we have to look at it in a full holistic lens, because the more we evolve, the more complicated we get, and the more we're going to have to learn to work through these through DEI.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to see the resistance start formulating kind of what that means and says.
It is interesting to see. And by the way, Dr. Enan Rudell's in here, who really helped it. Part of the orientation. He's one of the professors there.
Is he in the room with us?
He's in the chat. He just said, "Great presentation, gentlemen." So he really introduced this topic of diversity and brought this to the group. And I remember actually one of the slides that he presented to us. And I don't remember how it was divided, but I remember like the first things is what you see. The first, and that's what people assume is diversity and inclusion, is those things that you see: your skin color, your age, your gender, your sexual orientation, maybe but there was maybe 40 other elements to this chart where that make up a person and that makes us diverse. And the reality is I don't care who you are, where you're from, none of that matters. In the end, we're recognizing that we're all diverse beings, and we all have differences about us and all have different beliefs that have shaped us into who we are today, to help us form the opinions that we've formed, and also put a shade on how we see and view every interaction around us.
Yeah, you bring up a couple of really good points that I want to kind of focus on. So one of the good things about being a year 3 is I've been able to finish my concentration in inclusive leadership. And one of the points, and I'm glad Dr. Rudell is in the room virtually, so it's good to have you virtually connected. One of the echoing processes that I have come to learn was how to be able to get comfortable being uncomfortable in the context of understanding your socialization process, because that follows you everywhere. Whether you're consciously or unconsciously aware of it, your socialization process is going to show up in how you make decisions and how you interact with people. And those are your human biases that lead to potential prejudices, and then discrimination if you take action on it. So as a leader, whether you're a formal leader or informal leader, one of the learnings I've had to really digest through the last few years specifically was that in order to lead people, we have to understand people. And that means understanding all of, or a lot of, who they are. And that is the pivotal piece of leadership, is being able to leverage or influence others, and doing that in a way that's healthy, that's beneficial, that's supportive of people's mental health. And so understanding who they are and what that means, and who you are as a leader, as a person, really is a driving force of actually why I focus on inclusive leadership. I personally can't lead others if I don't start understanding who I am, what my socialization process was, and how to really become more consciously aware, as well as being able to be more consciously aware of others. And so that's really, really an important factor of inclusive leadership and the DEI world, and those aspects. Is we're leading people. At the end of the day, we are people, and we have a lot of differences and some similarities, but we have to recognize the differences.
Agreed. And it is an important piece. And I know a lot of the readings that we've been doing so far really discuss that, like the need for the ability to adapt to the individual and of course the situation around us, but being able to adapt and respond to the individuals, and not taking a blanket approach to how you lead and how you approach situations with everybody and everything that you're doing. I'm curious, from a novice's perspective, and kind of putting that hat on for a second, this task of being an inclusive leader, maybe you can shed some insight onto this. The task of being an inclusive leader feels sometimes like an impossible task, because how can you, it comes across like on the most base level of how am I everything to all people? How can I be everything? How can I please everyone? And we have that saying in our culture, well, I can't please everybody. And it sort of feels like, or at least that's what it looks like in media and in culture, that's what the DEI and belonging movement is about, is how do we need to start pleasing everybody. So like, what's your response to that? And like, how can we shift that perspective?
It actually goes back to I think one of the points I opened up with was everyone's on their own journey. So what might be for someone else might not be for the next person. And so really being able to find out or get to know or connect with different people, because their needs are different. So when I look at a leader and with a group of people, and we've been or I've been conditioned to say, okay, treat everyone the same. Well, that doesn't really work a lot of the time, because everyone's different. So in order to reach that, or to be successful, from what I understand at this point, is, okay, get to know your people, so see what they need. And we also have to look at the power dynamics, especially in a leadership position. We're in a position potentially of power over folks. And that should be treated extremely carefully, because people don't always have the best relationship with leadership that may be attached to authority, or authority in general. So when you start breaking those segments down between leadership and authority, you have to really grasp I encourage folks to grasp the concept of how important it is to get to know the person, so you know what they need. And so I was talking to a group of folks a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, and I shared that we, as leaders, for my philosophy has been, we facilitate or help facilitate other people's development, growth, learnings, while we facilitate our own as well as we're learning along the way. So we should never be done learning. This is an evolving process. So I think that kind of draws that to that point of, how do you cater to everybody? we don't know who the new staff are coming in. We can't predict that unless we have those special abilities. So we really never know how we're going to meet everyone's needs, because that looks different. But getting to know people first is, I think, a really, really good starting point. And being able to process that you might be in these conversations or getting to know someone that might make you feel uncomfortable from maybe challenging your own belief systems or being exposed to differences that maybe you're not used to. I think that, to my point earlier, is being able to sit in an uncomfortable space is really important. So, and how you're showing up to listen to them. I think listening is an under taught skill in a lot of ways. And so I can go into that more if you'd like.
Sure, I would love that. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And by the way, I'm sort of categorizing things in my head in a certain way that I'm trying to think of, if people are listening to this, what traits are they hearing that they need to develop as leaders? And so far I'm hearing flexibility, I'm hearing openness, empathy, and now active listening.
Yeah, very good analysis on those traits. And so listening, I'm an adjunct instructor as well. I love teaching. I look at leadership and teaching as kind of there's an intersection there. And so one of the things I like to be introspective and kind of go down memory lane of like, how did I get here? How did I formulate who I am? Yeah. And look at patterns and trends. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, like, we are never really formally taught to listen. So in school, in elementary school, we're graded on participation. And what does that mean? That means like vocalizing and raising your hand and sharing. And then I thought through, oh my gosh, like, what was one of the first activities that I remember in school? And it was show and tell. And we're telling and showing. But so we're never really, in my experience, taught along the way to really listen to each other. I would love to see a classroom designed where you get points for listening. So instead of participating, or maybe doing both. So being able to listen to others, but also listen to yourself is really, really a critical element and one of those traits. And how you're showing up. Are you listening to respond? Are you listening to understand? Are you listening to learn? Are you listening to help problem solve? Like, what kind of listener are you showing up to be? And so that's one of those traits, as you mentioned, those kind of pockets of traits that are in this discussion is listening is a crucial element.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point. And I'm just thinking too, all the ways that we're conditioned in our society, like especially nowadays, and as social media has gotten more popular, it's a lot more show and than anything, that we're always posturing. We're always trying to show people why we're the most important. We're very rarely listening to someone else's perspective or appreciating. And even when we're seeing somebody else's posts or comments or whatever it is, we're always thinking of how we can do better. How should we show up so that we can do the same thing or be better than them? And it's really this competitive mindset that we've put ourselves in. And when we don't meet those standards, we start to beat ourselves up, but that's a whole nother issue. But yeah, I mean, I think listening is something that is so missed. And I think as leaders, there's also a bit of conditioning that goes on, where a lot of leaders think that they have to have all the answers. So they're listening to come up with the best possible answer or respond in the most appropriate and best way possible so that they can keep that power dynamic going and show that I'm in charge and I have all the answers. And the truth is we, of course, we can't. As human beings, we don't have all the answers, and we don't know what everyone's experience is like.
Yeah, and then when we limit, and we have, for me, I had early on in my career, I had a natural way of limiting others by not listening. So I limited their ability to participate. I limited their ability to show up and be successful because I was quick to respond, or I shut them out without hearing them all the way. And so when you're talking about marginalized groups or different folks, people of color, LGBT folks, there's a whole different level of inclusion that maybe they might need than just folks that are maybe in a power dynamic, a majority of power dynamics that maybe are white males or whoever that power holder group is. So we have to be very cautious of how the environment might affect, or the environment we create and how that might affect someone else's limit. So when we talk about succession planning, when we talk about mentorship, when we talk about all these kind of structures and organizations, those are so crucial. And the DEI world is a really important layer to add, because maybe we don't realize how we are sacrificing their ability to share. We're limiting the folks that maybe are not in our position. So giving them space to really call it swim around or grow and share. And so it's really, really important as leaders is not to limit folks.
So let's talk about some of the benefits of having an inclusive leadership style or an inclusive workplace. So obviously, what are some of the benefits to an organization if they decided that they wanted to make their workplace more inclusive?
So I think I keep hearing and reading creativity and innovation. Those keep popping around, and we become so invested in an innovative world, and especially the world of tech, or how tech is layering on innovation and new things. We have AI, and that's like within a blink of an eye, AI was here, it seemed like, or it made front paper news. So how do we get to creativity and innovation? We have to be able to create spaces where people feel comfortable, psychological safe spaces where people feel comfortable to share and participate. And so I think that's one of those elements, that how do we get folks to be able to participate? And it's through inclusive leadership. But that starts with the leader and being self-aware. So really, a lot of the times I see a lot of leadership development trainings or workshops, and it's focused on external, it's focused on the other, but really it starts within that person. And so really focusing on someone's self, or a sense of self, to understand how you might affect the environment for other people. So this way they feel more connected to you. They can build some trust. Or we're extending the olive branch to create some trust. So this way they feel comfortable to share ideas, to take a risk, which is all that psychological safety. I'm interested to understand psychological safety in the sense that maybe different people need different things to create psychological safety for them. So individualize it, if you will, and what that looks like. So inclusive leadership is that lever to create innovation or creativity, for organizations to be successful, or to come up with maybe alternative solutions to operational challenges, or create more effective ways of being productive. And so it's that connection piece, but getting to that connection is really important, and making sure that connection is deep in scope, and real, instead of just a facade, as you shared a little bit. We kind of like to put on a show, or that kind of is a habit forming from being virtual.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to unpack, and obviously there's a lot of different advantages to it besides meeting social need and meeting the times of, like, we're moving, like, this is a very inclusive time, or at least it's looking like we're trying to make it be. I mean, there's a lot more division than ever right now. At the same time, the inclusivity movement is as strong as it's ever been. And there's so many benefits in meeting those needs and creating a psychologically safe workplace, but there's also the financial benefits, the creative benefits, just the different ways of having people collaborate and work together. There's so much value there, based on what I'm hearing you say, even in terms of, productivity and just general job satisfaction, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there's some mental health positive outcomes from there. But the difficult part, I think, is where I see people wrestle with these concepts of inclusive leadership and psychological safety, and is that they're really not very quantifiable. So you can't really see them. You have to pick things out and so you operationalize it, and you pick things out for it to make sense. And so you can't just create a spreadsheet and be able to put numbers to it, it takes a lot of effort and work, and in a more qualitative way. So it's going to be interesting when as time progresses to see leaders continue to, as you said, focus in on the inclusive leadership and DEI, but also kind of that resistance that people are feeling and that we see. I mean, DEI jobs were sliced a lot after the Supreme Court ruling. So I'm when we proceed forward, I really am curious to see the pendulum swing back and forth, which seems to be the pattern of history. Take 3 steps forward, 1 step back. So we'll see what happens. But I think organizations that didn't slice and dice these programs are going to be ahead of that innovative and creative aspects, as well as providing the environment where employees feel safe and engagement levels are increasing and people are learning and people feel good going to work and feeling like they're able to not be exhausted after a day's worth of work.
Yeah. Talking about it being sliced, a lot of these jobs being sliced, I'm wondering if, because humans are just so resistant to change and DEI threatens people's existence for some reason, I'm wondering if it hasn't already, maybe, if it's not going to come back just as strong, but just be painted differently or have a nice pretty bow on it and be called something else, and then be integrated into workplaces, and it's going to be a little bit more accepted. I think people somehow took it as like it's a hard right, but making our place inclusive. I have a feeling that they're gonna change the wording, they're gonna change the way they approach it, and then be able to attack the need for it. But like you said, it does require a shift in how organizations think in terms of immediate return on investment. It's a long-term strategy, and it's a long-term commitment, from what I understand.
Yep. And it can be an uncomfortable commitment. So and so I think that's really where I see a lot of folks that I speak with or people that I interact with is uncertainty or resistance. And I think I'm on my own journey as a white male, and I'm constantly, give me more information. I need to learn. I need to be better. I need to understand what I did wrong, and also forgive myself to the mistakes, because I'm unlearning a lot. So I think that's really, really important for folks to realize. But I think it's a very reactionary process where something happens, and I look at George Floyd and I see the reaction to that. Well, why did it take that for companies or organizations to make a statement? What did we learn from it? What did we recognize about ourselves, about what maybe we weren't seeing before? And now that we're connected to TV and news all the time, that things are much more visible to certain groups of people or globally. So we're being exposed a lot to a lot more and much quicker. Yeah. So I think that's helping the DEI effort in a way, but also it creates that virtual chaos of conversation that we really are not. I don't think we've learned enough. Some folks haven't learned enough to engage in those difficult conversations. So there's not a lot of productivity coming from those kinds of conversations. And how do you learn? So creating those structured environments that consultants do or DEI workers do to really get through some learning and sitting in that uncomfortableness is where that success point of growth comes from. Right. So inclusive leadership is really about growth of yourself and understanding yourself and how you show up and affect other people. Yeah. And being able to utilize your leadership in the best way for others based off of what others need. And so that's really important.
And it's interesting because it's change and growth within oneself. And Ashley Grimes, who's in here, who's amazing. She's the president of NAMI Florida. She's awesome. But she said,
include you in. Hello.
She said, people need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Change and growth do not happen in comfort zones. And it's interesting. Like, we talk about this, how it really starts with the leader becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable and getting those comfort zones, and then challenging the people, the followers of that leader, to also go through that growth process. But ultimately what it's creating is an entire organizational change and growth is what we're trying to do ultimately by including it within an organization.
Yep. And I think when you shared about calling it a different name, or I call that dressing up. We're dressing it up differently. And I think we need to really stay true to those words matter, and how we choose to say things matters, because that builds our mental models of how we experience the world. And so I think that's when we're dressing things up or changing the wording, I think that sacrifices the authenticity of it and the integrity of it. So I think it's going to be interesting when if organizations create business cases and call it a business case for DEI versus a real natural need for the sake of our human capital for the workforce. So, and that's uncomfortable because it challenges really our socialization process, as I mentioned earlier. It challenges a lot of basic assumptions.
I guess I'm just, and I don't have any data to support what I'm about to say, but I'm just based on just anecdotally, it seems like in our society, we do have a history of dressing things up. Even medications that taste bad, we make them cherry flavored so we can take them. Like it is sort of our society. And also, if it doesn't appeal to the higher ups in terms of numbers, there's a very low likelihood that it's going to be introduced unless they're forced to. Unless the uncomfortability of not changing becomes strong enough, then they're going to have to go through it to some extent. But I have a feeling, even though there's going to be some meeting in the middle of currently where we are, and then the ideal of everybody accepting this idea of total inclusivity, there's going to be some meeting in the middle, because that's just sort of how history and reality works, I'd imagine.
It's going to be an interesting couple of years ahead with the current events and the rulings and current Supreme Court justices, and so and the way that tech is kind of really helps people mobilize and share ideas. So it's going to be an interesting road ahead in this concept, in this world. But it affects people, and at the end of the day, who doesn't want to be included or feel included? So I feel, especially people that have been isolated before, it's hard. I have a tremendous level of empathy as an LGBT member, as a person that has had to deal with my own inner demons of just being on the receiving end of maybe not the best socialization process to be as inclusive as I possibly can. So it goes back to that individual journey.
No, it's important. It's important. And I think it's going to take a lot of people developing the empathy needed to understand why it's needed. You know, it's just one of those difficult situations.
Yeah.
You know, it's reminding me of, and obviously I've worked in the substance use disorder field for quite a while now, but, you know, we talk about the need for change, but oftentimes that change doesn't happen until somebody hits what they refer to as a rock bottom, which could be any form, but usually things have to get bad enough for people to decide it's time for me to make a positive change in my life.
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead. You were continuing.
No. I'm about to switch gears a little bit. So go ahead and finish your thought.
I just wanted to share that, to your point, that rock bottom, that actually kind of tailored to a lot of the research I read, shares that in order to change those minds or evolve your understanding of differences or how you show up, you have to really spend time with people that are different. That's really one of the truest forms of recognizing or changing your mindset or relearning something. I had experience being around different people to really build relationships and recognize, I was taught one thing and my history classes taught me one thing, and in reality there was a lot more left out, or their experience doesn't add up to what I was guided by the different guardians I've had in my life. So I think sometimes those relationships that you think you're forming and then they break because you have differences in philosophy or differences in basic assumptions, that grieving process of losing a friend or losing one person that you might have valued because something happened and that person now recognizes you as, you need to learn a little bit more about others in order to really be connected with people of difference. So I'm very passionate about having a friend group that is built on connection, that we can learn from each other. So I think that's one of those, so that rock bottom space of those feelings in a personal way, of a human connection way, rings a bell just from that kind of feeling of, oh, I need to, there's something missing within myself that I need to learn a lot more so I can be better for others.
Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Oh.
Is there, and obviously we're speaking in generalities here because otherwise we could talk about this for 10 hours or longer. But I think people are afraid at times to ask people of color, of other sexual identities or gender identities, whatever it may be. They're afraid to ask questions. They may want to get to know somebody else, but instead they just keep it on themselves and then pretend like the differences don't exist. Is that a mistake?
That could be a mistake. I mean, we end up we don't acknowledge those elements of someone. So I think it's individualized where you really, maybe for one person, having to acknowledge those in that relationship might look different than the next group of people. So I think there's a level of comfort or trust that needs to be formed if they're visible or not. So I think that acknowledgement of that element of that person or part of that social identity, that's really, really important to acknowledge and really recognize in a relationship and as you lead people. So that's really, really a good point. And I've often heard, I don't see color or those elements, and you've got to see that. That's who they are. That's part of who they are. So yeah.
Right. And to ignore certain things, it just doesn't make sense. And then it's sort of like an elephant in the room, but it's also, it doesn't have to be an issue, or it doesn't have to be like this big topic of concern, but it should be a topic of discussion at some point to help understand what the experience is like once the trust is formed.
Yep. And those are our microaggressions coming out, is the invalidation of someone. So there's a couple different forms of microaggressions and what they look like, and having to be able to really come to terms with the microaggressions that people display or tap into. I think that invalidation of part of who someone is a really difficult microaggression to receive, that unfortunately a lot of the time comes unconsciously. So the giver doesn't even realize they're doing it. And so we're actually harming someone psychologically without even recognizing we're doing it. So until you have that relationship with that person, they can call it out to you and you can learn from it. That's been a lot of my journey the last few years, is recognizing maybe things I've done or things I've shared, things I've said that were well-intended, but received in a more harmful way.
Yeah, no, I had an experience recently that was well-intended. And fortunately, the other person explained it to me very, very kindly, but I had asked for trust right after meeting somebody. And the person, and I meant it in a very kind way, like, hey, we're on this journey together. What we need to do is trust each other and trust that we're not trying to harm each other in any way with anything that we say. And the immediate response, very politely, was that, that's not easy for me. And I had to realize that, oh, shit, dummy, you are a white cisgender male from a privileged background who's had society on your side your entire life, and you haven't been challenged as much, despite personal challenges I've gone through. You haven't been challenged by society nearly as much as this person. The trust in society hasn't been lost. And so it's a naive perspective just to ask for trust right away. And it was a real learning moment for me.
Yep. And I think I alluded to that a little earlier with the power dynamics, and people look at authority and leadership may be different from their experiences, and white males have been in power for a long time, and those that has flowed through the centuries or and decades. So being mindful that what we ask for someone might be laced in privilege from how we're coming to it. So you make an extremely valid point. And I think we take for granted our privilege or maybe not even aware of it in times. And so recognizing that, it's good that they were able to call that out for you. Those are the moments that you learn and grow. Those are the moments that are uncomfortable. Those are the moments that you need to sit with. And for me, sit with and sometimes I sit with it for days and I'm like, how did I get here? How did I not recognize this? And then that power of recognizing it and growing from it. So it's uncomfortable. It is an uncomfortable process, but it is. I think there was an author, I forget who it was, that called it good pain. And so it's good purpose pain.
That's great.
Yeah. So,
and I'm not, this isn't the intention here is not to pat myself on the back, but my response to it, and I didn't respond verbally at that point. I really wanted to take some time to think and just understood the perspective. But it took me a couple hours to really think on, okay, why was that response given to me? Where I think a lot of people come from a challenging perspective of like, well, that person just doesn't get it, or they got trust issues, and they're so quick to label other people who don't agree or don't see their perspective. And I think especially us, when I say us, or I'll just say me as a white man, I need to kind of keep my learner's cap on and keep an open mind at all times to understand other people. And at this point in history, it's sort of take a backseat to some of this so I can understand and learn from other people so that I can be an inclusive leader when the time comes.
Every environment is an opportunity to learn. And if you give yourself the ability by taking the backseat or recognizing where you are as a whatever privilege you're holding, is really, really an important way to captivate and tap into some inclusive leadership. I think over the summer, I had an instructor who shared that they had to learn how to be white. And I thought of myself, I never had to learn how to be white. It just was taught. It just was passed down. Yeah. So when you're in these spaces where instead of responding immediately or rebuking that or questioning the validity behind that experience, I sat there and listened, and that was such a difference that I don't see often enough, was just sitting and listening and soaking it in, and maybe asking further questions to understand that person's experience instead of using microaggressions that invalidate someone's experiences or who they are. So I never had to learn to be white. So now I'm learning what that actually means.
Well, it's a lot to think about.
Yep.
And there was a conversation that I had on here, actually on LinkedIn. So it's on my LinkedIn. It's also on the podcast for the Workplace Wanderer, but with Dr. Brandy Dare. And it was about Black female leadership. And she shared a lot of her perspective that was really enlightening. And I was grateful for the opportunity to learn from her. And so I'm not going to repeat everything that she said. People are more than welcome to go watch the videos, but it's those types of moments and those having the open mind to be willing to learn from other people's experiences. And most importantly of all, and I think this is sort of the baseline, as we discussed and you mentioned earlier, of inclusive leadership, is developing an understanding that just because you have an experience and see something one way, it doesn't mean everybody else is. That reality is not always reality. It's different for everybody else, And understanding that is a real superpower. And it can really bring people together, or it can destroy people if you don't.
It's that thinking either or. What I experienced, what I saw must be true for others.
Yeah.
There's no way that there could be differences in that. And really, when it comes down to it, there are major differences in how we experience the world around us.
No, it's so true. And it shapes every bit of us. This is such a great conversation. I appreciate this so much. And there's still so much that I have to learn, just on this topic. And as school progresses, I'm really excited to learn more about it and learn from my cohort that is very diverse and understand their perspectives. So inclusive leadership, in your opinion, if you sort of had to sum it up, and because I think it's a bit stereotyped, or it's actually a bit politicized, honestly. I think people use it against people quite a bit. Before I ask this question, do you think the idea, the DE&I movement, do you think that becoming politicized is a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't think that it can be both. I think that
depends on how you use it.
What?
Depends what side you're on, I guess.
It depends on how you look at it. I think it's, people talk about being uncomfortable. That could be as bad for someone, but really when you reframe it, it could be good for someone. Like I mentioned, that clean pain or that good pain. So I think it being politicized, I think brings more attention to it. What that might bring is we're seeing it play out with different laws or different movements or groups forming. So I think that to politicize it is to politicize the human experience. And I don't think that overall is helpful long term, but it could be helpful in ways that are long term, like creating laws once we understand what that is and how to protect ourselves and how to support each other. So it's a very gray, wishy-washy answer, but that's the nature of inclusive leadership is wishy-washy and in that middle.
Well, what's interesting, kind of, if in our political climate, what's actually needed is inclusivity. Mm-hmm. It's really, and again, I think people think of it as a skin color issue or a gender issue, but political views and where you stand on the political climate, like whether right wing, left wing, whatever the hell you are. I think people, if there was more empathy and we're willing to listen to other people's opinions without forming some reactive emotion to it, or if they do, trying to understand the reactive emotion to it, I think we can actually make a lot of progress. But part of the issue that we have right now is the exact opposite of inclusion. It's division is what we have right now. And there's a hard line in the sand. And it's sort of serves as like a grand scale example of what's going on in workplaces, just in a bunch of different arenas and other different types of diversities.
Yeah, and at a institutional level or structural level, we're not taught to talk through these differences. I never was taught in school to acknowledge differences and work through those social skills and those aspects. We had gym and sports and competitiveness, but to really, so we're socialized. Again, it's that socialization process of to not really talk through that. When I was growing up, we don't talk about politics. There's a list of things we don't talk about. So there people are in the closet because they don't talk about their social orientation. Right. We hear it when people are white people are saying, or myself have heard that, don't say that because of their race or ethnicity, and we might be offended. And so, yes, so there's a very deep deficit of knowledge that we are learning with each other that has to take place. And that needs to start in the school system, in the early ages of growth and development, while our brains are developing these biases and prejudice or these biases. So I think at an institutional level, we're causing division because we're dividing ourselves by not learning about these concepts.
I agree. And I guess the reason why I brought up the politicizing piece of it, or is it bad or good, which is a wrong question. I don't know if we should refer to things as bad and good because it just depends on what side you're on. So I apologize to anybody for that. I guess because I'm in Florida and it's such a strong topic and it's being labeled, DEI initiatives are being labeled certain ways, and a lot of different communities are being attacked. That we're starting to make some progress in terms of us developing better understanding and education around, it's now being removed from a lot of people's, from a lot of schools, and it's taking a step backwards in terms of this inclusion. So so again, I'm sorry. I guess it's, again, depends on context, and I'm someone who's in Florida right now, and it's a very hot topic of some stuff that's going on here.
And that's a great learning moment for you, and I'm glad I kind of hopefully answered the question in a way that depoliticized it and made it more human. Is that the world we experience causes us to ask questions or causes us to inquire information in different ways. And so being a resident in Florida, experiencing what's going very close to what's going on there, and being in the news maybe has integrated into the way that you want to ask questions So the design of the question is really important. So I think that's a live learning moment.
No, it's great.
So yeah, but the world,
it's really a good or bad issue. It's just it's a differences of beliefs that are playing out in front of us in a political environment.
Yep. So, and there's a level of empathy that comes along with this journey of seeing someone with their different belief system than yourselves and feeling the frustration or the different emotions that come from it and wanting to help. For me, I want to help that person learn more. But then what they're sharing or saying is very offensive to me or other people and hurtful. And so that cross paths of how do I help them to learn more or to experience a moment of growth. It's an arena that you never really know what's going to be in that arena until you're in that space, because you don't know that person and you don't know what's going to bubble up or come from it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it ignites a lot of emotions for a lot of different people watching these things play out. And I think part of what that is that it's uncomfortable to see somebody take such a strong stance on something that you disagree with at its core. So it gets really difficult to watch that. And also, though, it's hard to, as somebody who typically tries to play a more neutral role and to see both sides and have that empathy and understanding of, okay, where is this coming from? It's difficult to see somebody who is kind of the antithesis to that, and watching multiple sides now who are becoming stronger and stronger in their beliefs because of their feeling threatened. Okay. And so it's tough. If we had more empathy as a culture, we could probably get a lot more done, I'd imagine. And if we were generally more inclusive, but it seems like because of the political environment, it seems like it's becoming more divided because people are getting stronger and stronger in their personal opinions and beliefs.
And those are maybe confirmation bias coming in of finding people and articles that just prove your point and reinforce what you think instead of experiencing the uncomfortableness of differences and being challenged in a way that is constructive or helpful. So right. Instead of, we could just Google something and find an article that agrees with me,
sure,
or you or whoever is making the point. So
well, and it makes a good point also, thinking about the confirmation bias and developing an understanding of what the other side or what your enemy or anybody is thinking and understanding and believes, and developing an understanding of it yourself, whether you agree or not, can actually help further your movement and further the progress that you're trying to make if you understand what the other side is thinking. So it's beneficial in so many different ways.
Yeah, instead of just constantly kind of projecting something to someone, you have to be able to hear them out to see where they're coming from. Right. I think I opened up with everyone's on their own journey, so you got to kind of meet them where they are if you're going to be in that environment with them or helping them along the way or in that growth space. So sometimes we got to meet them where they are, and so we can kind of hear where they're coming from, and they might receive new information or challenging information or experience differently. So.
And they might be more open to your side once you've let them hear. You let them speak and you hear them out. They may be open to hear another perspective, or you may learn something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You may have a deeper understanding of why.
Very true. So
I'm going to let you go because I know it's a Friday night. Thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. And I really hope it helped a lot of people develop a better understanding of what it means to be inclusive, maybe be a little bit less afraid of it, but also become willing to be uncomfortable. And if I can pull one takeaway out of this, is that inclusive leadership is about getting to know yourself better and understanding yourself better, and understanding the way that we interact with the world around us through the socialization process, through every aspect of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And if we do that, then we can begin to understand other people better as well.
Absolutely. Well said.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Sure. Cheers to learning.
Cheers to learning. So anybody who wants to check this out, this will be live on my LinkedIn or living on my LinkedIn for quite some time. And then I will also turn it to a podcast, so you can find it everywhere that podcasts are found. All right. Thank you, everybody.